All right, we are now recording. So welcome to the Sustainable Living series. The Sustainable Living series was dreamt up as a partnership with the land stewards, the master gardeners, and the Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District. We have Grace here, who is the master gardeners coordinator. And these classes are really a way for folks, whether you live on acreage, you are interested in gardening, it's a broader way to connect a lot of different folks in these more sustainable topics. So you can be a path maker and collect all of these classes. I feel like I'm talking about Pokemon when I say that. And one thing that's really fun about these classes is that we include a personal action list. And I was a little late to let Karen know about the action items. And so we are going to be sending those out afterward when you get the recording. And you can go to I'll include a link to our Sustainable Living series action list that includes all of the action items from past classes. And so you'll be able to see the recording link and then some suggested actions that are related to the presentation you're seeing today. And you'll also be able to see all of our past ones from the series. So it's fun. If you missed a couple of them and you wanted to go back to a few classes, you can do that. So all of you should be registered for the class today. And if you are not by chance, please make sure you reach out to Sandy tomorrow to get registered so that you will get both the link to the Sustainable Living series action list and access to, I'll be sending out Karen's resources and a PDF of her PowerPoint and the recording. So you got to be registered to get all of those. And my name is Nicole Smith. I am the Land Steward Education Program Assistant. In the past, if you've had classes with us, you might know Rachel Whirling was our Land Steward Coordinator. We're in the process of hiring a new Land Steward Coordinator. But for now, I'm your main contact if you have any questions or class ideas. We have a whole list. We have classes scheduled all the way through February of 2026. Our Land Steward Education Committee has been working hard getting folks all lined up so that you can continue to enjoy 1 or 2 classes a month for this upcoming year. So it's a pretty fun and unique thing. And you can find out about these classes. You might have found out because you are subscribed to our mailing list, but you can go to if you just type into Google OSU Land Steward Program, it'll send you to our Land Steward page, and there's a little subscribe button that you can click. We don't spam you, just send you a flyer for the presentation. And coming soon, we'll also be sending out a newsletter about what's been going on with the land stewards if you're interested. You can also type into Google Land Steward events, and this screen will pop up and it shows you some of the upcoming classes. We have one coming up next month titled Why Are My Trees Dying by Rich Fairbanks. And the extension has a rose pruning class. I believe that's in person. That is coming up on February 22nd. But we are all here today for Green Your Water with Graywater, an introduction to household graywater systems by Karen Taylor. Karen began her journey, sorry, there's a little screen popped up in front of my screen. Karen began her journey in the water conservation and permaculture over 20 years ago in the high desert in Arizona as a partner at Eden on Earth, an ecological landscaping company that specialized in rainwater harvesting and graywater systems. For the past 15 years, she's been a partner at Siskiyou Permaculture, LLC, focusing on permaculture education and consulting, using graywater and rainwater harvesting systems to conserve water and respond to the drought and potential wildfires in Southern Oregon. Well, welcome, Karen. We are so glad that you were able to join us here today. I am going to stop sharing my screen so that you can take over sharing.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Oops, push that button.
And if folks have any IT questions, you are welcome to add them in to the chat. Wonderful. Thank you, Karen. That looks great.
Great. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for being here this evening. I love seeing the programs that are happening through our extension service, and um, so yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Um, so I would like to start with just really feeling my gratitude for water. We could not survive on this planet without water, and our our fresh water is actually a pretty small portion of all of the water that exists on this planet. And so everything that we can do to use our water in a conscious way and and bringing in some gratitude and reciprocity in how we treat the water that we do use every day. So this is just a poster that's showing all of the different ways that we interact with water. And if you look at the center of the poster, it says water care, and then each petal, so this is different uses. These are different ways that we can recycle water. This is looking at the sources of water. This is how we store water. This is how we move it. And this is how we treat it. So if you look, as you move out on the petal, so we go from easy to access to much more challenging to access. So our rainwater and snow melt falls from the sky. We can capture it in buckets and rain tanks. It's pretty easy to access. Then we get into water that we don't have the rivers in here. So we do often use water that comes directly out of rivers or streams and ponds. But then we have groundwater. So we've got different levels of groundwater that we can access. And the same thing with how do we store it. The easiest place to store water is in the soil. Trees are really great storage containers. I mean, they're taking water up. It's like their trunks and their leaves are all storing water. Then we get into like barrels and tanks and ponds. So you kind of get the idea. But we get over here to recycling. And this is where we're talking about gray water, because we're taking water that has been used just a little bit. I mean, you've washed something, maybe you've taken a shower, you've washed some laundry. So it's not clean water because it's got some organic matter and soaps and detergents and things like that in it, but it's still water that can be reused, that we can put it back into the landscape so that it's actually benefiting the plants in our landscape. All right, so these are the things I'm going to cover. What is gray water? Why should we irrigate with it? How do we assess the site for it? I'm going to go over two specific gray water systems, which is the laundry to landscape and branch drain systems. We'll talk about mulch basins, maintenance and soaps, and permits. And things might be a little bit in a different order because I completely changed my slideshow today. So, but we'll cover all of those things. So, what is gray water? So here in Oregon, we can legally reuse the water that comes from our showers, bathroom sinks, washing machines, and kitchen sink, as long as it is not attached to a garbage disposal. Toilets are not included, and neither are dishwashers. And the dishwashers, usually because of the kind of detergents that are used in them. So, um, gray water is not toilet water, but you don't want to drink it either. So this chart is great because it kind of gives you an idea of like what might be in your different sources of gray water. So showers and baths are relatively clean. There's generally a predictable volume and frequency. Bathroom sinks, you've got toothpaste and shaving cream. Sometimes there's like hair. Um, there's the potential for fecal, when we're washing our hands after we use the bathroom. There's not as much of a volume that comes from our bathroom sinks. The laundry, again, it's a predictable volume. Usually, I think we tend to do laundry on a fairly regular basis, so it's something that you can calculate. It's really easy to retrofit. This is probably one of the easiest sources of gray water. But it does have a high concentration of solids. So there's like lint and fibers from your clothing. Certain detergents can be really hard on plants, and there's the potential of it being really alkaline that can also affect plants. So the kitchen is actually probably the hardest source to reuse as gray water. It's the dirtiest because we're dealing with food. I mean, if you're cooking meat, there's oils and grease. I know when I rinse out my my smoothie blender, it's got flax seeds, which definitely like to clog up gray water systems. So there's more kitchen sinks are more challenging to work with, but it's definitely possible to use kitchen sinks as well. So why should we even consider using gray water? Well, these pictures are from 2021 and 2022, and so we've had these drought cycles that have been really extreme, and so reusing water that you're already using, it helps lessen the amount of potable water that you're using. If you're rural and you're on a septic system, then it extends the life of your septic system because you're not putting as much water through the system. It's also a great way to irrigate a green zone that's part of a fire-wise landscape. So if you're wanting to keep an area around the house that's wetter, then gray water is a good way, a good use of that water. So this is a graphic that came from a program in San Francisco. So again, you're decreasing potable water demands. It's potential to have more robust plant health because they're getting enough water. And then you become more connected to your water because you can actually see, here's water that I'm using. It's going right directly out into my landscape. So I'm going to be a little bit more careful with what I actually put into that water, even though we really should be careful whether we are using the gray water or not. And then if you step back to kind of a bigger picture, it has the potential for helping, with watershed health. We're decreasing pollutants that are going into our water treatment plants, potential for increasing habitat, community building, especially if you do a system where oftentimes people will install a gray water system as part of a workshop, so it's an educational process. So one general principle in gray water design system is that there are no general principles. They're very site specific, and that's why it's important to spend time to really look at, to assess your site and assess your water, where your water's coming from. So, so this will probably be something that I'll put in your checklist. So there are some quick fixes that you can do, and that is take, take the P-trap off of your kitchen sink and put a 5-gallon bucket under it and then carry it out and water your plants. You don't need a permit for it, and it's pretty simple, but you do have to keep an eye on it because, you know, those 5-gallon buckets will fill up pretty quickly. You can use the dish pan. Again, you know, carry the dish pan full of water and dump it on your plants. A bucket in the shower. You know, oftentimes we have to run the shower for a little while for the water to heat up. So if you're capturing that water, you can then use that to flush your toilets. And then the hose out back from a sink or laundry. So these are kind of like the under the radar systems that you can do. So there are some times when reusing your water in the landscape is, you know, there's some reasons why you wouldn't do that. So the water quality of your source water, I know there's areas where we're high in boron. If your house is on a water softener, then you're adding salt to the water, and you don't want to put salt in the landscape. It is possible to use potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride, and that is better for plants, but it's more expensive. Apartment buildings, unless there's often not enough space or enough receiving landscape to hold the water. Sometimes drain pipes are inaccessible if they're, you know, if you're slab on grade and the pipes are in the slab, or you don't have a crawl space for accessing plumbing, then it's hard to reuse that water. So unsuitable soils would be really high clay and poor drainage, because you really want the water to, you know, the soil to soak up the water, and you don't want standing water anywhere. Unsuitable climate, which is not us. We have the perfect climate for Graywater. Health concerns. There's very few health concerns, especially if you do a system where the water is not pooling on the surface, it's subsurface. But the one thing to really consider is if you have a high water table. So this number is actually wrong. I didn't change it yet, but it's actually 4 feet. So you have to discharge water at least 4 feet above a water table. So so if you have a water table that's higher than 4 feet, then you might want to do a different kind of system to be able to use your gray water. So here in Oregon, there's actually 3 types of permits. I'm really going to focus on the type 1 permit, but I thought I would at least show what the type 2 permits are. So type 1 is probably what most people here are going to be doing, and that's a single family residence or duplex that's producing less than 300 gallons a day, and the water is used for subsurface irrigation. So interesting thing though, I went on the DEQ, the Oregon DEQ website today, because I wanted to see if they changed anything with the permits, and now the link is not working. So I left a message with DEQ. I'm not really sure what's going on, but if I learn anything, I will make sure that information gets out to you when we send out the follow-up for this. But what it used to be, or what it's been, is to do a legal gray water system here in Oregon, you must obtain a type 1 permit. So you're registering your system with the DEQ, and there's a form to fill out, and they just want to know, you know, you send them a sketch idea of what your source water is, what is the receiving landscape, you know, what plants are going to be a part of it, and what's your maintenance program, what's your you know, how are you maintaining that system. So a new permit is $90, and then every couple of years you just write them and just tell them that you're maintaining the system, and then it shouldn't be any other cost beyond that. Um, if you're doing a system, well, we'll talk about the two different systems. Um, you may also need a plumbing permit if you're actually cutting into the existing plumbing of your house. So that would be, county or your city permits. So type 2 permit is typically a commercial or institutional structure that's producing less than 1,200 gallons per day. Or if you want to do surface drip irrigation or landscape ponds that are not intended for human contact. So those have to go through more of a filtration and treatment before they're actually used in the landscape. So I'm not really going to address those tonight because there's a lot that you can do on a really simple. I'm all for like the simplest system that you can do to get the the most return. So the first thing you want to do is have an idea of how much water you actually have to work with. And this is just a chart that kind of shows. So we're looking at showers, kitchen and bathroom, faucets, bathtub, and washing machines. We're not going to look at the toilets because that's not gray water. And so it gives you an idea of how many gallons per minute you're using, and if you're so you can look, actually, especially some of the newer shower heads actually tell you how many gallons per minute you're using, and then you time your shower, and then it's like, all right, I have a water sense shower head. I took a 10-minute shower, so that's 15 gallons of water. And I do this, I take a shower so many days a week, so you multiply it by that. Then from that fixture and that source, this is how much water that you have to work with. And you can do that for all of these, all of your different fixtures or sources. I know with the new washing machines, some of them are the really high efficiency one are actually using less than 14 gallons a load. It's like more like 7 gallons a load. And it's really hard to find the actual amount of water that the washing machines use. So if you really want to geek out, you can take a container, like a big plastic trash can, make sure it's at least 35 gallons trash can, and you can do a load of wash running the water into that trash can and actually measure how much water you use. So, that's what I had to do with a washing machine that I used before I moved into my new house. And so I learned that I use 15 gallons every time I do a load of wash. So you start with determining how much water you have to work with. Think about what you want to use the gray water for. Where is it going to go? Do you want to water existing perennial plants, or do you want to create new gardens that you're going to, new gardens in a different part of the yard? So really look at where's that water going to go? And one thing to do is look at where your source water is. If you've got a bathroom that's on one corner of the house, and maybe you've got a kitchen sink that's in another part of the house, instead of trying to divert all of that water together, create zones around the house, and actually, so the water from this tub or shower can go out of the house near the area where the actual tub is located. Same thing with the kitchen. My kitchen sink is right on an exterior wall, so I can just run a pipe through my wall and out to the garden right from my kitchen sink. I used to actually live in a place that had a gray water system where I could watch the water come out of the house every time I wash my dishes. So That was not a legal system, but it worked anyway. So, all right, so we're assessing what kind of soil do you have. Um, the, so you've located an area that you want to create a garden or an existing garden. Um, do what's called a percolation test or a perk test. And the guy in the picture there has dug a hole in the ground. It's at least 12 inches deep. It's like the width of a shovel, and you fill it up with water, let it drain, fill it up with water. So what you're doing is you're trying to mimic saturated soil. So fill it up a couple of times, and then you're actually, he has the tape measure in there. He's measuring how quickly that water soaks into the ground. And so you really want that water to soak into the ground within like 12 hours. You don't want to really have standing water more than 12 hours. Um, And some people I know have put in fences and fence posts, and while they were digging their fence posts, those holes filled up with water. So they have a high water table. So that's that's a good clue that um, that maybe you shouldn't be dispersing your gray water in that location. So slope is also a consideration. If your slope is more than is 45 degrees, then it's too steep to disperse gray water. We talked a little bit about water source and water quality, whether it's well water, city water, softened water. Some people are using rainwater for their potable water as well. Um, so if you're on a well, then hopefully you've tested your water for things like arsenic and boron and things like that. So, and again, softened water, really shifting to using potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride. So, and climate here, so we'll talk about being able to divert the water into your septic or sewer or the landscape, putting in valves to be able to go back and forth. But I have seen systems and commercial systems too, where they're discharging water into the landscape year round, even in snowy conditions. Um, so it really depends on your site, and it depends on how, again, water table and how well your soil drains. All right, so this is where the size of your site might might be an issue. So there are setbacks that are required for sensitive features. So you want it at least 100 feet away from your well or springs, 50 feet from rivers, streams, and lakes. Um, and I don't necessarily agree with the stormwater management structures such as rain gardens, bioswales, and catch basins. In Arizona, we put our gray water and rainwater into the same basins because the rainwater actually helps to dilute any salts and detergents and things that might build up in the soil. So this is the legal system. Again, I question it, but you're not supposed to discharge gray water into your rain gardens. And then 2 feet from property lines. But you can actually do a system that crosses the property line if you're doing a combined system with neighbors, or if um, so, but there has to be a written agreement to be able to do that. Oops. Okay, so we've been talking about sources and assessing the site. So these are the elements of the graywater system that you will be designing or implementing. So we talked about the graywater sources. So that's, shower, washing machine, kitchen sink, and hand sink. Then there's the collection plumbing. So the sinks are easier to access, and the washing machine are easier to access than showers are, typically because your shower drain pipe is underneath the floor, and it may be in a crawl space, or it may be in the wall of the house if it's on a second story. But having access to plumbing is needed to be able to divert it. So in a type 2 system is where you would use a surge tank, filter, and pump. In the systems that I'm going to show you, we really don't use surge tank, filters, and pumps. Again, those are added things to have to maintain and take care of. So then you have the distribution plumbing, and this is the plumbing that is out in your landscape. This is how you move it to the receiving landscape. And a really important part of a graywater system are the people. And so because we're not just letting water flow down the drain and it goes away to your septic or sewer system, there is some maintenance and some awareness that we need to have about how we take care of the graywater system that we're using. So the two systems that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to first mention a couple of books, and they're in some of the resources that we'll share with you. But the first one is called Create an Oasis with Graywater by Art Ludwig. And Art is probably, I guess we call him the grandfather of Graywater, because he really developed and wrote about a lot of these systems. And his website is also part of the information that we'll share. And then the second book is called Graywater Green Landscape by Laura Allen. And I love both of these books. The Graywater Green Landscape has, it really walks you through how to design and implement the system. It's got really great photographs, and yeah, I mean, they're both really great resources. So the first system I'm going to talk about is laundry to landscape. And again, this is really the easiest source of gray water to access, because most of your plumbing it's not in the walls, it's not under the floor, you have access to it. Typically, I know in Ashland you don't need an additional plumbing permit because you're not cutting into or altering existing hard plumbed pipes. It uses the pump from the washing machine to move it out into the landscape, so it can move it. You're not completely dependent on gravity and having enough slope, so it can move it across a fairly flat landscape. Whereas the branch drain, you really need to have some slope away from your source for it to work. We're discharging the water into what we call mulch basins and tree wells. So the mulch in the basins actually become part of the filtration system, and it can be spread out. It's easier to divide the water in amongst multiple plantings. And then the branch drain system is what you would use for sinks and showers. You will need a plumbing permit and potentially a plumber to actually do the diversions. You're using a rigid ABS pipe in the ground to distribute the water, so it really depends again on slope for gravity flow. So it can be divided, but it's a little bit more tricky because you're really having to make sure you have a consistent slope, and And when you're dividing it, you're wanting things to be level, and it's a little bit trickier to install, but it still works. I mean, it still works well. You definitely want to have clean outs in the branches. And again, both of these systems discharge into a planted mulch basin. So here is a drawing. I think this is from Create an Oasis, of a simple laundry to landscape system. And you can see I have the washing machine. Um, I'll show you a better picture of the three-way valve, diverter valve. So all of these systems, you need to be able to divert the water either to the landscape or your septic or sewer, because um, again, if the ground's frozen or the soil saturated, or if you want to use you know, bleach or a cleaning material that you don't want in your landscape because it will kill your plants, then you need to be able to divert that water. Um, so you've got the three-way valve, and then you can run the pipe if you're on an exterior wall. So ideally, you're on an exterior wall, or you're in a location where you can run a pipe not too far to an exterior wall. Then you run it through the house, and then it includes an anti-siphon or an air admittance valve, and that is just to make sure that you're not creating a siphon and just sucking the water out of your washing machine every time you do laundry. um, so this is connecting. So typically we connect to 1-inch HDPE poly line. So that's the irrigation plumbing. And then this is a cross section through a mulch basin. So you see it's dug out around the tree, and then it's filled with wood chips typically. And the water is being, can you see my cursor? So the water is being, oops, emitted into the mulch. So you don't have any surface water or really place where you can see water, standing water. It goes right into the mulch, then it soaks into the soil. And I'll show you some better pictures of this. And then, yeah, so this is just how the laundry to landscape is set up. Again, this is just kind of a look at the three-way valves and different ways of doing a vacuum breaker. And here's a setup. So it's really important to label your systems. And so, this is labeled so when the handle is up, that means that the gray water is going into the landscape. And if it's turned to the left side, then that means the water is going into the sewer. And so, clearly labeled. And this one even labels what kind of soaps and detergents that you can and cannot use in the system. So basically, the water line from the washing machine, instead of going into sometimes they go into a sink to drain, or into into the wall, into a drain pipe in the wall. Um, so you take that water line from the back of the washing machine and attach it directly to the three-way valve, and then this pipe will go back into where the drain pipe originally went, and then the pipe that goes to the landscape goes out through the wall into the landscape. So once you're in the landscape, what you see here, this is our 1-inch poly line, and this is a 1-inch to 1/2-inch T. So all of these are plumbing parts that you can get at Grover's, at probably Ace Hardware, Home Depot. So we usually divert it down to a half an inch. You could put a half-inch poly pipe on the end of this, further away from the main line. And the nice thing, the simple thing about this is, I can adjust how much water is flowing out of this by tipping it up or down. So it's something that you can actually adjust and tweak the amount of water that comes out all of the emitters once you install the whole system. So this is looking at a system that um, it's being set up around existing landscape. So I actually like to run my distribution line either like in a pathway or on the edge of a pathway. So that way I always know where it's located. And then these are the mulch basins. So this is our distribution line, and you see it's blue. You can sometimes find purple polyline. It's not so common, but it is out there. And that way, it's an easy way to designate that this is a graywater system. It's not coming from your potable water. And then teeing off. So this is a tee that's reducing it from a 1 inch to a half inch. Then this is all a mulch basin. It's going to get filled with mulch. Same thing here. These are all going to get filled with mulch. And um, and then using a valve box, just an irrigation valve box. I've seen systems where people have used kind of a sturdy nursery pot that you cut a hole in, and what this allows you to do is check your system, and it keeps the mulch away from the end of the pipe that's discharging water into the basin. So you want to be able to take the lid off of that and look and see that the water's flowing freely, there's no clogs, and there's no roots, there's no, potential for roots to get up into the end of the pipe and clog it. And it also, when the gophers or the critters fill it up, you can see and you can dig it out. So that's part of the maintenance of these systems. So this is what they look like when they're finished. So each one of these valve boxes is where the end of your emitter is. You can pop the lid off. You can adjust the amount of flow, and it's watering all of the plants that along the pathway there. So this is another kind of system that I'm showing you because these are, these were developed before the laundry to landscape system became designed. So this is a washing machine that is using a surge tank. So one of the things that I forgot to mention, it's really important, is that you really do not want to store gray water. You really don't want to store it at all. The longest I would store it would be 12 hours, but the best place for it to go is directly into the landscape without storing it or holding it or for any period of time. But the surge tank, some people thought that if you put the water in a surge tank, because when you're doing laundry, you get a bunch of water and then it's filling up and washing, and then there's a bunch of water. So there was this thinking that this would just slow the water down a little bit and allow the water to be distributed without these like pulses of water. And I'm showing this because it's this is definitely a real do-it-yourself system, and this just has a garden hose on it, and it allows you to move the water around to different places. So it could be going into a mulch basin, and it's it's a little bit easier than having to um, dig and bury irrigation line all over the place. The drawback is if you kink the hose or if it gets just left somewhere where it's pouring out onto, the landscape, you really, again, gray water is really safe, but still you don't want to discharge it anywhere where it's just going to run off or cause a problem. This is another system. This is my friend Brad Lancaster, who wrote the books um, Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond. And so if you notice, there's 4 pipes there. Each one has the name of a plant on it. And so when you do your laundry, you move the drain pipe counterclockwise with each load do, and it's watering a different tree. So each of those pipes goes to a different tree, and so each load waters, so you're watering a different tree each time you do a load of laundry. I'm gonna drink a little bit of water. Okay. So the branch drain system it's instead of using the flexible irrigation pipe, the HDPE poly pipe, you're using rigid pipe, the ABS rigid pipe in the buried pipe in the landscape. So this is looking at so one of the things that's missing from this system, it does not have a 3-way valve. So ideally, you would have a 3-way valve so that you can divert it to the landscape or not. But again, it's the same basic idea, and you're running the pipe out into a mulch basin. And again, where the water is being discharged, there's rocks over the end of it so that it's keeping it more subsurface so that animals don't have access to it, and it goes directly into the mulch basin. And again, this is diverting your sinks, and well, actually the sinks are easier the than showers, because a sink, potentially you can actually put a 3-way valve right under the sink and divert it through through a wall, and you don't have to get down under the house to divert the water. But you really want to make sure that wherever you divert your gray water, that you're not downhill from your toilet. So that's where probably having a plumber would be ideal. So this is just a cross section of different ways of dispersing water into the landscape and having it subsurface. So ideally, it's something like this on the left, where you've got this is either a bucket or, again, the valve box, so that it keeps mulch away from the end, and it's got an access cover. This is using rocks. This one is not ideal because it's exposed, basically. All right, so this is looking from bird's eye or plan view of how one might disperse gray water using a branch drain system directly from the source plumbing. So so here you have a tub, and again, instead of going and combining all of the gray water and then dispersing it in the landscape, if you can, it makes more sense to disperse it from the source itself. And and then create zones around the house based on where that source water is. Um, so again, branch drain system, it's using rigid ABS pipe. Each place where you're dividing the flow of water, we're using what's a standard plumbing fixture or plumbing pipe. It's called a double L or a twin 90. But makes it good for a graywater system is that we're actually using it backwards. Instead of combining two sources of water into one, it's dividing one source of water into two. The other thing that we do is create a clean out, and I'll show you pictures of what they look like once you've created a clean out. And you do that by drilling a hole and threading it, and then putting a cap on it so that you can unscrew that and look at it and make sure that there's nothing clogging your system. So most of the plumbing that's used in a branch drain or a laundry to landscape systems are, standard plumbing parts. For the laundry to landscape, it's typically 1-inch poly pipe, the HDPE landscaping poly pipe, and 1/2-inch poly pipe, and then standard fittings. And then for the branch drain system, again, it's using ABS out in the landscape, and typical wastewater fittings. So this is what the double L looks like. We're looking at it from different angles. When these pipes are buried, if you're wanting to divide the water equally, usually we'll put a brick or a concrete paver under it so that it can be leveled, and then it ends up being buried. So, or you put a valve box so that you actually can access this and look at the clean out. The three-way diverters that are used for these systems, this is a Jandy valve or a Pentair valve that are used in swimming pool systems. And I think they have 1.5-inch and 2-inch diameters for working with 1.5 and 2-inch pipe. This is the brass three-way valve. These we typically have to order online, and you can get them for pretty good prices. I think they're like, I don't know. I mean, it's been a while since I bought them, but I think I paid like $30 or $40 for a valve. So they're not cheap, but that's probably you might be able to find something cheaper online. But people have asked, why can't I use just two regular valves? And it's just, there's more potential for blockage if you have them turned the wrong direction. I mean, the three-way valves just make the most sense for these systems. So this is looking at a mulch basin in the landscape, and you can see the end of the pipe with water coming out of it. This 5-gallon bucket is just showing you what is buried here. So this green bucket, looks like this. And so it's got a hole on the top, there's some holes in the side, it's down in the mulch, and then the mulch comes up around it. So it's a pretty deep basin with so it's deep here, and then there's shallower planting areas next to it. And again, this is looking at a system that was installed in Arizona, and each place that you see a valve box is where there is either a flow splitter for the clean out. Um, oops. So this is one of this is the time where I'm like, it's really important to document your systems because then when you want to go have a slideshow, you actually have photos of it. So because the system, we actually hung the ABS, we used the deck that's over here. So the water came out from the shower underneath the deck, and we were able to use use the plumbing tape, that metal plumbing tape, to hang the ABS and get just the right slope to get it out into the landscape. And it would have been really good to show you the picture of that. Um, but in this system, so I like that we were able to incorporate rainwater in this system. And so this is a rainwater tank with the overflow that actually flows into these basins. And the basins are set up so that when this one's full, then it overflows into this basin, and then there's an overflow into another basin. Um, Again, not really supposed to do that here, but I think it actually is beneficial because you're, again, flushing out. There's going to be more potential for salts and, um, and build up from the detergents that the rainwater kind of helps um, dilute. I guess that's the word that I'm looking for. Let's see how we're doing. Okay. This is just another mulch basin. Again, we're not doing, so I should take this picture out because this is not the preferred way to discharge water, but um, so I have seen systems where the gray water was combined and it went into a surge tank. But anytime you put gray water into a tank, now we're talking more of a type 2 system where you need to filter it and treat the water because you're holding it for a certain amount of time. There are commercial systems that will do that. And also, I guess these would also be beneficial if you have to pump the water uphill because your house or your source is downhill from where you want to irrigate. So it just gets it's more expensive and it's more complex. There's filters that you have to make sure are clean so it doesn't back up water into your house, but it's possible. And I'd also like to talk a little bit about the receiving landscape. Um, I think gray water systems work best if you're discharging the water on perennial plants. So things that, you're not digging up and moving around each year. It's great for fruit trees, fruit and nuts and berries. Um, I like the idea of using it close to the house, so you're creating a green space, someplace that's has more moisture as it's the potential to catch embers in a wildfire. So, but people have used gray water for subsurface irrigation of vegetable crops. You do not want to put it on anything that you're going to eat, like root vegetables, anything that you're eating, what's actually touched the water. Um, there's actually, if anybody's heard of um, oh shoot, I can't think of it right now. There's, let's just skip that. So anyway, this is looking at a more complicated system with pumps and screens. And so again, there's some commercial systems that you can use those. So I'd like to talk a little bit about hugelkultur because Graywater is great in a hugelkultur system. And so um, hugelkultur is a method of, it's a way of using woody debris. So I know I have a whole front yard full of it right now after this last storm. And so um, instead of chipping it all up, I can cut it up into pieces and create a basin and bury it and then mound soil on top of it. And then it becomes a filtration system. And as the wood breaks down, it actually becomes really spongy and holds on to water. Um, it's um, it's a very it's a system that continues to break down. So eventually, instead of being a mound, it's going to be more like a low raised bed. So, so you're planting annual crops on the mound itself, and then perennial crops in the basin that's created next to it. All right, so we've talked about determining how much water you have to work with, where you want to move it into the landscape, the conveyance system to get it from the source into the landscape. Then, then there's maintenance, and there's how you use the system itself. So, um, if you're doing a kitchen sink, I usually use a screen in the drain so that less food actually goes down the drain, and being aware of, how much oils and meat. And again, like I said, the my smoothie that kind of will build up in the pipe. So just being aware of what goes down the drain, and also, um, so there's filters to clean. There's having the clean outs on your flow splitters, and then also going through, yearly and checking to make sure that all of the emitters are clear. There's nothing blocking the emitters at the end. Sometimes, I mean, I have critters that fill up anything. They're if you have gophers, they will definitely fill up your valve boxes. So something to check on a, you know, maybe quarterly basis. I'll talk a little bit about what kinds of soaps. So ingredients to avoid, and this is, I've included this as one of your handouts that will be sent with the follow-up. So really want biodegradable soaps that are free from salts and sodium compounds, boron, borate, and borax, and chlorine bleach. Um, Ideally, no petroleum distillates, sodium-based water softeners I already talked about, and antibacterial soaps and cleaners, because our the important part of the filtration system is all the microbial activity in the soil. And so if we're using antibacterial soaps, then we're killing a lot of the microorganisms. So that's why we have the three-way valve. Um, and again, it's like just becoming more aware of what is going into the water that's going onto the plants. Let's see. All right, so we talked a little bit about graywater codes. Um, so basically, if you want to install and use a graywater system, you'll develop a system design and plan. I think, and this is just this a simple drawing of a laundry to landscape system, and you can see you've got your source. right down here, they came up with the water budget. And so they've got a top loader. They do 5 loads a week. So that's 200 gallons per week. So they've determined they need 100 square feet of mulch basins. And so they've they're going to grow 4 kiwis, 1 peach, an apple, some artichokes, and roses, and I guess there's some other plants in there. So um, they can use 145 gallons per week. So there's some extra water there, I guess. But this is, this is what the DEQ is looking for, just a simple sketch of what the water budget is, what's being irrigated. And then this is just for the installer, what all the parts are that they need for this system. And the dashed lines here are the mulch basins. So there's dashed lines. So I think that is it. So oasisdesign.org, there's all sorts of information about Graywater and also other things that Art's been working on. Um, Graywater Action is an organization that Laura Allen was one of the co-founders of. There's a lot of um, they're teaching online classes and there's certifications. I guess there's some in-person certifications for people that want to become installers. And that's something that we actually really could use around here, or people that are trained and knowledgeable to install systems like this. Um, and then the DEQ, which has a whole bunch of information about how to design the system as well. And that will be a part of your handouts as well, all of this information. I think that's so you're going to receive this PowerPoint slideshow in the follow-up. And a disclaimer, I just usually put slides that I'm not using my presentation at the end. So um, there's actually a slide for a workshop that was from last year. So, but we might end up doing a workshop this year. But anyway, I'm going to stop the share now, and we're open for questions if anybody has questions.
Wonderful. I'm going to scroll on up. We were quite an active chat. Folks had a lot of questions, clarifications. Let me come up back to the top. All right. So I had a couple of questions from Toby regarding their house gutters drain into a holding tank. Is that considered gray water?
Oh, gutters from your roof? That's rainwater collection. So that's not gray water. Gray water is water that comes um, from your house through your plumbing fixtures. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then Toby had a follow-up question with that regarding the collection tank and pump, and I referred Toby to Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District. Cora had done a presentation
Right.
with us on rainwater catchment, and I shared, Toby, hopefully you saw that link I shared with where you can get them to come out and assess your property, and they can look at that for you.
Yeah, Jackson Soil and Water Conservation they're awesome. It's a really great service. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. All right, let me scroll back up. Let's see, from Colin. Colin was asking about the different systems for folks with a high water table. You had mentioned folks using a different system, but then you went in and you explained the systems. So I'm wondering, Colin, if you still have that question.
Well, I have another possible solution. Um, so there's there's like the commercial filtration systems and treatment, and the main thing is we really don't want to add contaminants to our groundwater. So that's the concern. So if you do a type 2 system or a tier 2 system that goes through some sort of filtration and treatment, then then you can discharge it. You know, it's because it's been, you know, cleaned and purified. But if you didn't want to do that kind of system, there's what's called a living machine, and there's and so you're running your gray water through, it's like a sand bed with plants, so reeds and different plants that will clean the water. So it runs through, you know, two or three of these tanks before it can go out into the landscape. Um, I mean, again, any of these systems that are using filters, they take more. Um, you have to monitor them more, and it depends on what your source is. If it's just if it's a shower, then um, then that's one thing. But if you're doing a kitchen, if you're yeah, if you're doing a kitchen system, there's, you know, so much organic matter and filters, and so putting on some kind of grease trap or filter before it even goes into a reed and sand bed, um, then and that's something that has to be cleaned pretty regularly. So you have to be willing to do that because grease traps are kind of gross. But anyway,
That maintenance. Amber had
yeah.
a follow-up to that question. Well, could you pipe captured gray water to an area of the property with a deeper water table if the source was near your 4 feet?
So yeah, so that's it. So there's a couple of things. I mean, sometimes water tables fluctuate. So during the wet season, the water table is going to be higher, and dry season, it's lower. So that's why the three-way valve is beneficial. Um, but if you're doing a type 2 system where you're running it through, you know, a tank and a filter and then pumping it somewhere, then it can be discharged. Yeah, if there's part of the property that is a lower water table, then yeah, it could be moved into the landscape.
Wonderful. A question from Amber. Can a small farm without water rights reuse single-family resident domestic well water usage for commercial crop production? So if observing, monitoring for pollution or contamination concerns, of course. For example, how is a farmhouse on a for-profit farm considered, or a single family or commercial?
That's a good question. I am not entirely sure. Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess the consideration is, um, I mean, again, you're going to assess how much water you actually have to work with because commercial crops they use a good bit of water. So, um, yeah, I don't know how cost effective it would be, but it's it might be worth looking into.
Are there any legal issues to using gray water to grow fruit food crops?
That's yeah, like I said, I'm not entirely sure, and it may be that it has to become a type 2, you know, or a tier 1 or tier 2 system that goes through filtration and treatment before it goes onto the crops.
And Amber, that might be a great question for our small farms folks at the extension. So you're welcome to send me an email follow up, and I could forward you to uh, Diane and I'm blanking on her name. I could forward you to the folks that are here at our extension. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through. And I think Amber, perhaps your question on soil type is probably um, more of a master gardener or question for Scott Good on modifying and amending soils, like using a green stormwater treatment basin blends for limited soil types.
Yeah, can I just ask, Karen, have you seen any of your like projects do that where they have like a super heavy clay pan or something like that and they basically go in and just like amend the top percentage of soils so that it is like able to sequester or like, you know, manage the amount of water coming on the landscape?
I haven't, but that sounds really interesting. So you're creating a more, by using certain amendments, you're opening up the soil so that it's more, has better drainage. Yeah, I mean, I would think that would be worthwhile.
Cool. Thank you.
Let's see. And let's see about mulch up against the tree trunks. It does look like on some of your slides after that came up, the mulch was further back from tree trunks. Does the mulch basin design have a protective barrier to keep it from smothering the trunk?
So, yeah, that's a great question because you don't want to have mulch right up against the tree trunk. So, oftentimes, if you're putting in a system with that for existing plants in the landscape, your mulch basin it's further out in the drip line of the tree. Um, and if you're doing a new mulch basin for new plantings, typically, you'll have the basin, but then everything's planted up on mounds so that so the roots are down into the basin itself, but the trunk is actually up, you know, so you're mounding and the basin is at the root zone of the trees. So yeah,
Is there a typical depth that mulch basin would be?
a typical depth. So that's where you know, you go back into your calculations for how much water you have to work with and how much each emitter is emitting. So you want your basin to be able to capture that water. So it's not necessarily a typical. So you're wanting to design it to capture the number of gallons that is going to be emitted. Um, so if you're doing a laundry to landscape, it's you're sizing your system to be able to handle however many loads of wash you do at a time. So that's why it gets a little, there's information that you have to understand before you can actually size your system. So, but then as far as typically, I'll dig a mulch basin that's at least a foot deep and then however wide, and long than it needs to be. So hopefully that's helpful.
No, it is. It looks like that was from Abigail. Just that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
And I think you kind of answered this a little bit later on, but why is it bad to store gray water?
So gray water will turn into black water pretty quickly because there's bacteria and skin and hair and dirt and it has enough biological activity that it'll just get funky and stinky and you just don't want to store it. Just don't do it.
You
Unless
did
you're
mention though.
doing a filtration system and treating it. So
Gotcha. What are your thoughts on white vinegar added to the laundry cycle? Maybe a cup diluted in the 15-gallon is probably not a problem.
I think vinegar's fine. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And
And there's also, just speaking about things that you might be using, um, there's also there there used to be a concern about shampoo and conditioners and things, that you would use in the shower, but because of the amount of water, um, it's not as much of an issue as detergents and using, and I guess in the shower, what you clean the shower with would be a consideration,
Mm.
um, but not necessarily like the products that you're using, soap and shampoo, conditioner.
Referring to the spelling of gray water between the E and A, DQ, using it with an A instead of an E, is there a difference? Is the same thing?
Tomato, tomato.
Okay, thank you. And
Yeah, it's funny because both of the Graywater books are with an E, so I use both.
okay. And Amber, I saw your hand up a moment ago. Did you want to unmute and ask, and perhaps also add your question in here with the rush?
Sure. Yeah, I don't want to like take up too much space, but I have a lot of questions.
Great.
Uh, so one question was just like any types of mulch, like sources of mulch that you don't recommend because of, issues with sudden oak death, phytophthora, etc.
Um, yeah, I mean it definitely, it's good to know where your source is because it's like any mulch that you would use in the landscape, just being aware of.
But there's no like spec that needs to be made. You can chip your own on site.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You can
Okay.
chip your own on site. Um, and part of the maintenance is because it's an organic material, it will break down. So you will have to, you know, dig the basins out every so often and replace the mulch. So that's part of the maintenance of the system.
Thank you. And then this is sort of a follow-up because Anne had put something in here about gray water and commercial crops. Thank you, Anne. My question that's a follow-up to that, in case you know, this is maybe highly specific, is for things like if you're just washing your root veggies or your lettuce and you're an organic farm or, non synthetic input practice, is that wash water then also considered gray water, even though maybe probably your only quote unquote pollutant in there is like sediment potentially? Maybe some critters,
Yeah,
but like
that's
no
yeah, that
soaps, no skin.
right. Yeah, I would think you could use that directly. Yeah, that's a great idea to like reuse your wash water back in the landscape or in the farm.
Yeah. I'm just thinking for all those small farmers who don't have water rights.
Right. Yeah, and I'm going to add that to my slideshow because there's a lot of water that is used in the processing of the harvest. So,
Well, and there's
yeah.
an exemption. So that's what's interesting is you can use domestic well water to wash commercial products, even if you don't have a water right. But to grow those
Uh-huh.
commercial products, you have to get your water from somewhere else.
Huh. So, yeah, so if it's now become gray water, it's a very gray area, isn't it? So, because yeah, because you're reusing it. That's a good question that I don't really know like what the legalities are for that.
I guess, and sorry, this is just, I know there's a chat blasting situation here, but my question isn't whether it's gray water or not, but if it still has to meet the same standards of like cleanliness for a
Right.
commercial operation. So anyway, this is way down a rabbit
Yeah.
hole for
Yeah.
producers, but I appreciate the discussion. Thank
Karen, do you happen to do assessments for if folks were looking to hire for assessments, or do you have contractors that you recommend?
I wish I had contractors to recommend. I actually did a search. And so, yes, I will help for folks that want to do DIY. I can help with assessment, definitely. Um, and we need contractors. Um, let's see, Julie Silverman with this City of Medford may have some contractors. There's we've given a number of classes. Actually, Laura Allen has come in and done some trainings. Um, and so some of the professionals who have taken those classes are listed. So, um, and I have not looked to see if it's been updated or, but if you just do a search for Graywater installers, um, yeah, we need them. We need people that would like to do this.
All right. Are there any other questions from folks? Go ahead, Amber.
Are there any rebates available through different like partner orgs for these systems? Like there's a lot of rainwater catchment rebates, right? Like get your 50-gallon thing at a discount. Is there any like sort of incentive for folks like with support financially?
Not right now. I did notice on the DEQ website that they are looking at ways to incentivize it, but I don't think there's anything official yet. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any follow-up questions for Karen? Feel free to unmute yourself.
I was just going to say if anybody wants to reach me, my information is on our website at siskioupermaculture.org. And I think my phone number and email is on there. And I guess I could add it. I'll add it to the information, to the checklist.
Wonderful. Thank you. Are there any water budget templates available?
Water budget templates. There's the chart that I showed in the beginning that just showed different fixtures and how much water potential per fixture. Um, so are you thinking, is the question about what plants need or
Sorry, that's just the
assessing how much
term.
water?
Yeah, that's a term you had used earlier, I think, for assessing how much water your household or whatever or operation uses, like on average, right? Or maybe seasonally that changes or something. And so yeah, my question was just like, do you guys have like a quick, Google sheet or something with some like
You know, I seem to remember seeing one, so I'll look, and if there is a link for it, I'll put it in the follow-up information.
Sweet, less work for me.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Karen. I see a lot of folks thanking you. Folks really enjoyed the presentation.
Well, thank you all for joining me tonight to talk about Graywater. It's a lot of fun.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, folks, for joining us tonight. And take me a few days to get the presentation uploaded. And Karen, if you have anything additional you want to send out, and those action items would be great. And we'll
Right.
send those out they'll come to you via the same registration link that you received your Zoom through. So keep an eye out from Ideologic and email.
Great. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.